Welcome to the Renewed Horizon. No, this isn't a Twitter ratio thing. Ratio plus L plus aspect. Essentially, look at any screen, then find the ratio of its width to its height. It doesn't just refer to screens. In fact, it normally refers more to the image or video because a screen can fill in whatever the content doesn't fill. Aspect ratios have been around technically since the invention of photography, but it wasn't really used as a term until video became a thing. So here you go, the oldest surviving video footage. It's called the Roundhay Garden Scene, and it was filmed in 1888. It's a 2-second long loop, but would you look at that? Good old 4:3 aspect ratio. What's 4:3 aspect ratio? Well, from the advent of motion picture in the late 19th century until the switch to widescreen in the early 21st century, 4:3 was the agreed upon standard. For television at least, because that's what televisions were shaped like. On the other hand, movies decided they wanted to be wide as hell. In recent history, the most common ratio for films has been 2.35 to 1. But that's too wide for TVs, so when movies got aired on television, you get the classic, "This film has been modified from its original version. It has been formatted to fit this screen." Eventually, it just made sense for television screens to make the switch and also be wider. As a result, 16:9 was born. It was wider than the 4:3 television aspect ratio, but not as wide as movie aspect ratios. And that means we arrive at a question. Now that 16:9 is the standard, how do you show a video of some kind on a screen that doesn't match that aspect ratio? There are 3 ways you can do that, and 2 of them are shit. The first is to simply crop off the sides or the top and bottom of the video. This works okay, but it's far less than ideal, and for a lot of shows and movies, it ends up obscuring some important details, and because the shots were designed that way, it just doesn't look right. It's really noticeable, even if you're not somebody super into aspect ratios. Just look at the backlash when Disney used this method for episodes of The Simpsons on Disney+, or the Funimation cropped versions of Dragon Ball Z. The second method is letterboxing or pillar boxing. This is the fucking best. Basically, pillar boxing is when my screen is too damn wide, so I toss some black bars on the side to fill in all that empty space. Excellent for 4:3 aspect ratio on a 16:9 display. Letterboxing is the exact opposite. It's when my screen just isn't wide enough. So slap some black bars on the top and bottom, and you are absolutely golden. But not the golden ratio. We don't talk about the golden ratio. Fuck the golden ratio. The final method is a great way for me to never trust you ever. Let's say I have a 4:3 video and I want to watch it at 16:9. What if I just... Nope, can't do it. I am not stretching this video out, and you can't fucking make me. I already know it's gonna look like shit. I don't have to actually see the shit. I don't want to see the shit. I'm not doing it. This video is in 16:9 aspect ratio because that's my favorite aspect ratio. Also, it's the one used in most YouTube videos. However, if you're watching this on a mobile phone with a wide ratio, you might be able to zoom in on this video. Maybe you automatically set videos to do that. If you didn't notice that I just made the bottom of the screen do some fucky shit, then you're zoomed in right now, and I'm really concerned for you, bro. This is an intervention. Oh shit, smartphones. I could talk for way too damn long about the progression of phone aspect ratios, but here's the thing. I don't wanna. Moving on, what's mobile, yet not a phone? Do you know? Yeah, it's these fuckers. Fun fact, every single Nintendo handheld console has a different aspect ratio. The original Game Boy line is almost just a boring ass square, though it's technically a rectangle, clocking it at 10:9. The Game Boy Advance went real wide for the time with a 3:2 aspect ratio. Then the DS wanted to be anything but widescreen with 2 whole 4:3 displays. The 3DS top screen probably could have been 16:9, but instead it's another weird aspect ratio, 15:9, which is actually just 5:3, but don't worry about it. And of course, the Switch is 16:9 because it also has to be displayed on the average television because it's also a home console. That's also why before the turn of the millennium and for a bit afterwards, pretty much all home consoles just used 4:3. That was the shape of TVs, you know? Eventually that shape changed and widescreen happened. Because widescreen happened, video games had to adapt. With television, something was either filmed in a wider aspect ratio, or it wasn't. With video games, almost everything is rendered in real time, so for a lot of games, you could just widen the area that was being rendered, and boom, your 4:3 game is now in 16:9. Most games for the Wii could be in either aspect ratio, as could a lot of later released PS2 and Xbox games. So, when remasters are made for early 3D games from the late 90s and early 2000s, they typically bump up the aspect ratio to 16:9. But that sort of thing only works for 3D elements. If the game is in 2D or has a significant amount of 2D menus, then you either have to keep that part of the game in 4:3, or you have to completely redesign it. This too becomes a problem with pre-rendered cutscenes. And oh shit, now we're back with the same conundrum TV face. Do we crop it or stretch it or letterbox it? Who knows? Anyways, that's the basics. Think of a good use of aspect ratio similarly to a good use of audio design. If it's fucked, you're gonna wonder what's going on. If it's good, no one will notice. Well, most people won't notice. Then of course there's me, someone who's kept up at night by this kind of shit. Why is the gameplay of Mario Party 8 in 4.3, but the menus are in like 5.3 or some shit? What? So, I don't know if you've noticed yet, but I have something of a deep interest in the history of television. I know why Peacock is called Peacock. I'm too dangerous to be left alive. So, back in 2021, I began hearing about Marvel Studios' WandaVision and how it covered the history of American sitcoms. For obvious reasons, that got me immediately interested. So I didn't watch the show at all until last month. Regardless, I loved it. So much respect and care was put into replicating how television was produced through its long history, and I was just really impressed by it all. I was having a great time watching it and picking out all of the... What the fuck is that? Okay, so on a very special episode is the name of the 5th episode of the series and takes inspirations from classic sitcoms of the late 80s and early 90s. So why the hell is it in 16:9? Look, I have no problem with episode 6 leaping to 16:9 since it largely takes inspiration from Malcolm in the Middle, which was always filmed in 16:9 and was broadcast in 16:9 by the end of its run. Side tangent for just a moment. Malcolm in the Middle was initially broadcast in 4:3, so when the widescreen versions were later used in Blu-ray releases and on Netflix, people suddenly were able to notice a lot of stuff you weren't supposed to see that was hidden behind those black bars. This leads to the iconic screenshot that got passed around the internet a few years back about the empty desks being full. It's a wonderfully fun quirk of that era. Okay, back to WandaVision. As I was saying, its 5th episode is inspired by a number of sitcoms like Family Ties and Growing Pains and Full House. Not one of those series was ever broadcast in 16:9, so I can't even comprehend why they would do this. And to top it all off, all the sword homies watching WandaVision in Universe, they're watching it in 4-3. You can see it. I can see it. I can taste it. What the fuck? When I was watching the episode, I used the settings on my TV to switch it into 4:3. Now, yes, I understand that's a cardinal sin. And yes, I should be severely penalized for such an unscrupulous act. But I ask you, fine people of the jury, please keep in mind why I did this. I simply wanted to right the wrong of a big-ass multi-billion-dollar megacorporation for the sake of my own sanity. Is it really that big of a deal in the grand scheme? No. Did the aspect ratios of the Walt Disney Company lower my enjoyment of the show for the duration of that episode? Absolutely. But WandaVision is still an outstanding show and it otherwise does such a perfect job using its aspect ratios to tell the story it wants to tell. And oh, the transitions between aspect ratios are so brilliantly done. Every time one of those scenes happened, I would just rewind it again and again to experience that pure bliss of seeing a perfectly executed shift in aspect ratio. Chef's fucking kiss, man. But on the topic of things you can watch on Disney+, let's talk The Incredibles. As someone who's watched this movie a number of times since its release, I can safely say it was my first exposure to a film that changed its aspect ratio for effect, and from what I can tell, it's actually one of the first instances of using 4:3 to specifically demonstrate to the viewer that, hey man, this shit's old. And this is a pretty common use of 4:3 these days, but I'll be honest, I wasn't cognizant of this change in ratio during the many times I watched the movie as a kid. The first time I actually really noticed an aspect ratio shift was when I watched Kill la Kill for the first time. The flashback scenes were all animated in 4:3 and had this nice effect to them, and I remember thinking that was super cool at the time, and that feeling has stuck with me as I've delved ever further into the world of anime. The Millionaire Detective Balance Unlimited also changes ratios in flashback scenes, but instead uses 2.35 to 1. Otherwise, it's the same idea, so there's not much to talk about, but any excuse to bring up that beautiful show with those beautiful men is a good excuse to do so. But an anime that did do something outside the norm is Vivi Fluoride Ice Song. Weird name, I know, but trust me on this. Imagine the plot of Terminator 2 Judgment Day, where a robot is sent back in time to stop the androids from taking over, but instead of it being Arnold, it's basically just Hatsune Miku, and she'll kick the shit out of you while her song's playing. But I'm getting off topic. Aspect ratios. The show masterfully uses the swapping of the ratio to supplement the storytelling by having events that take place in the original timeline be animated in 2.35 to 1, and everything in the new altered timeline being in 16:9. It's so simple, but it brilliantly communicates to the viewer what timeline these events take place in. Another great use of aspect ratios is in 86. It's in episode 22, so I'll try to avoid spoilers, but about half of this episode uses 2.35 to 1, which in and of itself isn't anything too special. But what makes it amazing is the use of silhouettes bleeding out from the letterboxes and certain characters overlapping with the black boxes. It's really effective in context. At one point, you even get this wonky, ultra-wide, sort of 5:1 aspect ratio. It's crazy. And it really culminates in a gorgeous scene where the letterboxes become translucent and we get a bunch of beautiful shots that were framed to work well in both ratios. And it's just exquisitely done. But other times, aspect ratios are just weird. In Super Mario 3D All-Stars, Super Mario Sunshine was presented in glorious 16:9 for the first time, but for whatever reason, Super Mario 64 is still in 4:3. Though, it honestly feels kind of right for some reason, even if I would have preferred it being in widescreen. Plenty of games in the transition era in the 2000s were made to be played in 4:3. Sometimes they would just make the game playable in 4:3 because fuck it. But what if I'm Goodfeel in 2008 and I want to make one of the finest 2D platformers of the decade and then never make a sequel to it? Wario Land the Shake Dimension. That's what they call it in Europe. But if I was Goodfeel, I'd be in quite the conundrum. Because you just put all that effort into making a super pretty looking 2D game and form-fitted it to 4:3. You can't just stretch it or crop it or show the player what's out of bounds. Nobody drew that shit. It's a fucking void out there. Someone had the brilliant idea. What if the void was my friend? Boom! There's all the nice things. It's convenience without dead space. Because why would I talk about dead space? It's just in 16:9. The 3DS is dummy weird. 5.3 or 15.9 is kind of an in-between of 4.3 and 16.9 numerically. I think you can see why. Basically, this means 4 3DS games get pillar boxing for the top screen when played on a 3DS. The bottom screen is actually still 4.3, just like the DS. We actually get a weird case of ratio mixing, which is a real term and definitely not something I came up with just now. So when you're viewing 3DS footage on YouTube, for example, you get these small ass black bars on the side. But Nintendo would never. With trailers for 3DS games, they almost always found some way to put a border around it or just put an actual 3DS around the footage. I was actually able to find a Kid Icarus Uprising trailer from over a decade ago that actually had the black borders, but that almost never happened. Because of this weird aspect ratio, watching 16:9 videos like those trailers on a 3DS would end up weird as hell. You get these little ass boxes on the top and bottom for things like YouTube and Netflix, and very rarely, these small boys were actually used in-game. In the new Nintendo 3DS version of Fire Emblem Warriors, the pre-rendered 16:9 cutscenes from the Nintendo Switch version of the game are down-resed and letterboxed to work on the weird-ass 3DS ratio. Look at this shit, it's amazing. Speaking of letterboxes, I love when games will roll up black boxes to make that bitch look extra wide for like an important cutscene. You guys remember Super Mario Galaxy 2, right? Yeah? Because Nintendo sure didn't. I promise I'm not bitter. Sometimes Galaxy 2 does that exact thing outside of gameplay when they're just showing you how damn cool the galaxy you're about to explore is. But when you're going after all the green stars, that change in ratio goes from black to green. It's so festive. Shit looks like it's St. Patrick's Day up in this bitch, and I love it. It's so quirky and charming for no goddamn reason. Persona 5 does a similar thing for some of its cutscenes. All of the 2D cutscenes are in standard 16:9, but the 3D ones have this really weirdly shaped letterboxing that has elements of both 2.35 to 1 and 2:1. I'm not really sure why that is, to be honest. I mean, the subtitles fit cleanly into the bottom letterbox, which is nice, but that could have been achieved by just cropping these scenes fully into 2:1. But on some level, I'm glad they didn't, because it's time to talk about 2:1. Okay, how do I describe this ratio without sounding like a dick? In film, it's occasionally used and it's becoming more common, but film uses a few different wide ratios, so having one more isn't exactly that weird. For TV though, it's always felt kind of pretentious to me, I'm gonna be honest. Historically, this ratio has existed in some capacity since the 1950s, but it wasn't until the late 90s that an Italian filmmaker was like, yo, this shit's the future, and dubbed it Univisium because he thought it would unite film and television. 2:1 is intended as an in-between for the two mediums, so it's this odd mix of 2.35 to 1 and 16:9. So I understand that because this dude made this ratio to unite film and television, both have to use it to create this union. And it seems rude of me to go around insinuating that film can use it but TV can't. But I'm sorry, it just looks dumb on television. If I'm watching a movie in the theater, the projector can make it whatever ratio it needs to be. But if I'm watching a TV show, is it so much to ask for the series to just look like it was designed for the screen ratio of most screens it's going to be shown on? But with 2:1, that shit's going to look wide on any 16:9 television you put it on. And so does film, yes, but film has a reason to. What screens are actually 2:1? Phones! This fucking Google Pixel 3! So, I guess Netflix was banking on a lot of people watching shows like Stranger Things and The Crown and 13 Reasons Why on their damn tiny-ass phones. I mean, look, I'm sure Netflix knows I watch a decent amount of their content on my phone, because what can I say, I'm a busy bitch. So maybe they're just looking out for the phone homies. I mean, I'd still prefer to just be 16:9. Most phones aren't even a perfect 2:1 anyways. I can kinda sorta give Netflix a bit of a pass, because I can almost see where they're coming from. Maybe. But the BBC, I have to ask, why is the 13th Doctor's era of Doctor Who in 2:1? You're not Netflix, you are a TV channel in the United Kingdom. And why is it cropped to 16:9 and uploads
to the official Doctor Who YouTube channel?
Why not just make it 16:9 from the get-go then? What are you doing? Also, 16:10 aspect ratio monitors. I get the appeal, but I just can't do it. I don't need to see 10% extra Google Sheets, and I certainly don't need extra pillow boxing on my stuff. Look how tiny this movie looks on this tall-ass display. Also, I'm here to tell you that books have an aspect ratio. Dimensions of a piece of paper, it's really just a ratio with aspect. All those comics you've been reading, aspect ratio. The manga, this ratio has so much aspect. The fucking Twilight Saga, aspect. I'd agree that... I'm going fucking ballistic here. I gotta calm down. Anyways, the point here is that whether you notice it or not, a lot of thought has to be put into what the ratio of a screen or a video is going to be. And even though most people will never talk about it, aspect ratio is absolutely everywhere. So I'm hoping that maybe you'll notice the aspect ratio more and pay attention to how it's used to tell a story. And hey, maybe one day you too can be cursed with the knowledge that 8:7 aspect ratio is actually something worth arguing about.